Hello everyone, today is Sunday. I just got back from church and I'm going to spend the day, I think, just doing a few small things to get ready for school, and then I'm going to relax the rest of the day. I need it. I am really trying to make sure that I spend my weekends on either tasks that don't feel like schoolwork, things like reading, because that's just always fun, or just getting a few chores done. I do have some laundry I need to get done. But I want to also sit down and kind of have a reset for the week. I have been using Ruby Granger's academic planner this year. This is the first time I've ever used it, and let me tell you, this planner, using it has kind of been life-changing for my productivity. Not so much in that I get more done. That's not the case. It's more like it's helping me manage my stress levels in relation to my productivity, and it helps me manage my workload each day, make sure I'm not doing too much in one day, and I can just make a list, and then once I'm done for the day, then I can just be done, and I can kind of add things to the next day's list. We are starting our 5th week of the semester. That's crazy. I can't believe we're in the 5th week. We're starting the 5th week of the semester, and one thing I want to do is have a master list of everything that has to get done throughout the week. I have not done that so far, and Ruby's planner doesn't really have a place that's big enough for everything that I have to get done each week. It has a small page where you can kind of put your priorities for each week that you want to accomplish. But as far as every single thing that needs to be done each week, there's not really a place for that. And that's totally fine. I'm just going to make my own, so that way, once the checklist for the week is done, I am done. Because the temptation when you're in grad school, especially when you're in a PhD program, the temptation is always to think, oh, I could always do more. As soon as I get free time, I'm going to feel guilty and want to, spend time doing more schoolwork. However, I want to pace myself better because I have not paced myself well so far. We are a year and 4 weeks into this thing. And if I'm going to make it for the next 3, I really need to pace myself better. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you how I kind of just lightly decorate my pages to kind of make it more fun each week. I don't do a whole lot. I'd like to get more stickers at some point. There's not a whole lot of room to decorate her pages, but you can do, a few creative things. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. And then after I do that, I think what I want to do today is I'm going to read. I'm reading, I think it's called Emily Wilson's Encyclopedia of Fairies. It's by Heather Fawcett. It's a new book for me. I've just started reading a few chapters of it and I really like it. It's kind of the vibe that I want for what I'm doing in school. It's about this Cambridge professor who she's gone to, I want to say it's Iceland. It's been a while since I read the first few chapters. I started it about a month ago and I haven't got to read anymore. But the main character, she's going on a search for fairies and she's putting together an encyclopedia of fairies and trying to find the hidden folk. And in the book itself, it's written like journal entries and she's even got footnotes and things. And I'm like, this is everything that I would like to be able to do if fairies were real. And so I think it'll be a fun source of inspiration for me to kind of remind me, when you're in graduate school and you're working so hard and trying to accomplish certain tasks, it's really easy to forget that you're doing this because you love it and forget that you're reading these stories and going so deep into them because you love them. And I think this book, it's a little early to tell for certain, but just already the vibe of it, I think it's going to help keep that wonder alive and help me make space to just be enamored with the literature that I'm reading, because why else would I do what I'm doing? It's fun. It's fun stories. Like this week we read in Latin reading group, we read a story about when the Anglo-Saxons were invading and there was trouble with the Britons, and they tried to sit down and come to some kind of a truce. Well, there was a little bit of shadiness going on. The Anglo-Saxons had in mind to kill the Britons, and so I think that was right. The Anglo-Saxons were going to kill the Britons, and they did. They killed 300 of them. Very sad. However, what I learned in that class was that this story, this is so cool. So fast forward in the story timeline, Merlin, yes, King Arthur's wizard, Merlin got it in his head one day that he wanted to commemorate the deaths of those 300 Britons who were slain by the Anglo-Saxons. And he decided that the most appropriate way of commemorating this horrible tragedy would be to go steal this ring of giants, this Stonehenge, essentially. He stole Stonehenge from Ireland, brought it to Britain with his magic powers, and set it up. And that's at least one version, how some people tell it, of how we got Stonehenge. So kind of cool to start seeing all these timelines kind of come in place in my head and see the different manuscripts talking to each other or telling different stories or continuing different parts of different stories. So that was kind of fun. There were also dragons in this Latin reading that we did, which was really, really cool. I think tomorrow I might film another video talking to camera, telling you a little bit about kind of what a day in the life is like when I'm just home, because I'm home a couple of days out of the week just working on my schoolwork, and how I get that done, what kind of a list that I make. You'll see the list. I make the list today and then I'll do it tomorrow, but I'll kind of show you a little bit of a day in the life of what I do and how I divide up my workload, all those kinds of things, give myself breaks. So that should be fun. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, one other thing. I'm watching The Rings of Power. I'm going to be watching another episode tonight. Oh my goodness. I feel like I need to talk about it because I have a Tolkien paper being published fairly soon. Hopefully it's in the works. It's in the revision process. It's in the review process. And I feel like because of this, I feel like I have to watch the show. Otherwise I wouldn't watch it because I hate it so passionately that it's almost too insulting for me to be able to watch the show. But because I'm writing about Tolkien, and if I'm going to be a Tolkien scholar, and be able to, speak to Tolkien issues, I feel like I have to watch it. And it's been nothing short of literary torture. But I can go on and on about why I hate the show and what I hate about it. There's lots of layers to it. It's beautifully shot. It's absolutely stunning in terms of visuals. But let's set aside the more surface things that I hate. I hate the writing. The writing is very flat. The plot, there's hardly any coherence to the plot. You'll have hour-long episodes where very little actually happens, and there's no real point to whatever happens. But more on that later. Some of the casting is okay. Some of it's really bad. And if you're going into this show thinking I'm going to get a show that's like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I'm going to get an exposure to Tolkien and his world, you are sitting on a throne of lies. That is not what this show will give you. If you enjoy, cheap, cheesy fantasy and just want the vibes, then this show will be fine for you. Not dissing cheesy fantasy. I watch a lot of cheesy sci-fi. But if you're just wanting the vibes, this will satisfy that itch. But if you are actually wanting to understand more of Tolkien's world building, more of the events that led up to the trilogy, you are not going to get that. You are not going to get anything of that, any of the ethos of what Tolkien wrote. You're not even going to get a good sense of what actually happened other than the most barest of facts. So just know that going into it. But here's, I think, the thing that's most offensive to me about the show so far, at least from season 2, and that is this. Tolkien built his world. You cannot separate Tolkien's creativity from who he was as a person. That's true of any author. And Tolkien was a Catholic. Tolkien was deeply religious, very devout. And he created this world, created this story for his moment as a gift to his generation, essentially, and the generations to come, because he had, lived through 2 world wars, lived through an epidemic, the influenza epidemic, lots of financial instability, both in his life and in the world, lived through a lot of crisis. And it was a time in the world when a lot of the literature was fairly dark. A lot of the literature was heavily existential and asking questions about, is life even meaningful? Is there any point to suffering? Is there anything good in this world? Can we even say anything's good or evil? And how do we handle evil? And that's where the Lord of the Rings was born. The Lord of the Rings and that whole world was literally written in the trenches of World War I and the time following. Because of that, because of the context, and because of who Tolkien was, his world is deeply providential. That just simply means that things happen for a reason. There's a plan. There's a sense of things being orchestrated towards a good outcome. Even though the bad things happen, they're woven into the ultimate plan that's going to lead into what he would call eucatastrophe, this sudden happy turn of events where the good guys win and evil is vanquished, at least for now. And there's a point to the suffering. It's not meaningless. Things don't just happen randomly. In The Rings of Power, the world is completely different. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones at all, Game of Thrones is a world where George R.R. Martin intentionally tried to be the opposite of Tolkien. Let's imagine a world where there is no point, where there is no, good triumphing over evil. Things just happen randomly, and it's meaningless and chaotic and oftentimes despairing. And what we have in The Rings of Power is a poorly written version of Tolkien that is more like the Game of Thrones world than Tolkien's actual world. And that's true so far. I'm almost, how far are we into it? There's only a few episodes left of season 2. And things just seem to randomly happen. They just come upon things. There's no sense of purpose, no sense of destiny. There's a very old concept of weird or fate in Anglo-Saxon literature where someone has this doom upon them. And the doom isn't necessarily something bad. It's just, this is what they are purposed to do. This is what they are called to do, and they can't escape that calling, and they have to fulfill this destiny. There's a very heavy sense of that old English Anglo-Saxon mindset in The Lord of the Rings. In Rings of Power, it's gone. And so that has a trickle-down effect to so many other things in the show. It has a trickle-down effect to the way the magic works and what the magic is for and what power is in the show. And the magic ends up being this cheap parlor trick. It's a very despiritualized world because there's no transcendence. There's no transcendence in the Rings of Power world. There's no sense of Iluvatar or Eru or the One, the god of Middle-earth, orchestrating events at all. And if anyone should be aware of those things, it would be the elves, and they're not in the show. And the magic that they do is very much just parlor tricks. Essentially what you've got in the Rings of Power is you've reduced the spiritual powers of the elves and the abilities that they have to just purely magic tricks. Yes, magic is a concept in Tolkien, but magic doesn't have the same connotation in Tolkien as it does in perhaps other contexts. I remember a class that I took last fall. It was on like the soul and religious practices and literature, and we made the distinction in class between religious rituals, which are meant to somehow bring the participant into communion with the transcendent, with God, whereas magic is an attempt to wield control over the world and have more control over the world. And in the Lord of the Rings, you see the elves having been taught by the Valar and been trained in using these gifts and this knowledge to make the world more beautiful and to further Iluvatar's will in Middle-earth. Whereas people like Sauron, his impulse is to use magic to dominate, to control. But even in the Rings of Power, even though you have the separate goals of Sauron in the show versus the elves in the show, let's say, while they don't have one of them is desiring to manipulate others and control others for their own gain, whereas others are trying to manipulate flesh, as it's called in the show. They're trying to control flesh so that they can do good things in the world. That's not at all the kind of dichotomy that is in Tolkien's world when it comes to magic and what magic is for. In the Rings of Power, magic is just control one way or another, however you slice it, and it just depends completely on who's wielding it and whether or not they're wielding it to good ends. And so I could just go on and on. This clip is probably long enough, but that's kind of my source of great disdain over the show. I'll try to temper the rage and not just keep ranting about it. But anyway, I'm going to watch more of it tonight. Pray for me. Okay, I'm going to get to planning. I'm going to get my planner set up. I'll let you watch that, and I'll just kind of show you how I set up a day for a school day. So